Hello, welcome to Jim and Ben's Movie Adventures. I am Ben, that is Jim, and this is the podcast. We watch movies and inflict movies upon each other. This week's movie is a Jim joint. He chose it. I mean, what I said wasn't wrong, but it felt wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I picked it, if that's what you're trying to
Yeah,
say.
it's a Jim adventure.
Yep,
Uh,
a Jim
I
venture,
mean,
we
so
could
at
say.
the end, what was the first of all, what was the movie you chose this week?
Look, I chose Dragonslayer from 1981, and it's weird because I thought for sure, Ben, you would not have seen this film, and I also thought I didn't even know if you'd have heard of it, and then I found out on the end of last podcast you actually wanted to watch it, hadn't watched it yet,
Well,
and
spoilers, we didn't actually mention that at the end of the last
I'm
podcast.
assuming everything that you had indicated. I was like, I don't think he's watched it. So
So I hadn't watched it, and so the reason I wanted to watch it is in preparation for when we started to do this podcast. I did a little research on movies, and I have a list of movies that I want to watch, and a lot of them are movies I've seen and that you've seen, and I just think it'd be fun to watch again. But I deliberately went out and looked for movies that I hadn't seen or I thought you hadn't seen. And one of the movies that popped up when I typed in best fantasy films of all time was Dragon Slayer. And then I did a quick cursory bit of research on it, and people are yeah, it took its inspiration from a lot of fantasy stories before it, but it did a lot of big things on film that kind of hadn't really been done before. Uh, and especially with its dragon design and stuff like that. So that's why I had it on my list, and it probably would have been one of the next one or two that I chose.
that's crazy.
So
So
you pipped me to it.
it just shows that we've been friends since we're 12, like
Yeah.
in sync. But
11.
11, I don't know. I can't count. So
We
maths,
were 11.
it's our movie adventures, not our maths adventures. But look, I really love Dragon Slayer. Now, I came to Dragon Slayer as an adult, so obviously 1981. It was before I was born. As a film, and it was something that really wasn't even on my radar. But I got into as sort of a film, buff fan, whatever you want to sort of say. As an adult, I
A
had
connoisseur.
a connoisseur of films, good and bad. But I basically had gaps that I wanted to fill in my film library of things I'd seen, things I hadn't seen, and I went on like a run at one point. This was years ago of like 80s fantasy that I had just never watched and always sort of just heard about. So I watched Dragon Slayer. I watched Excalibur. I watched Legend with Tom Cruise. I watched Willow. I watched
Which historically you do not like.
yes, that's right. So and look, I have to say, and I watched Conan the Barbarian, all of these sorts of films that were sort of like this like 80s sort of fantasy. And I remember thinking after I sort of did that deep dive and went and looked at all these, I actually think Dragon Slayer is the best of the bunch,
Well, look, yeah.
so
80s fantasy is a minefield.
yeah.
Um, there is very few safe spots. And look, I actually have some problems with Dragon Age, and they're based on how I view films now.
Yeah.
It's because it is very much a product of its time, but I very much enjoyed watching the movie. And I liked kind of studying it as almost a weird bit of history. But yeah, there's some horrible, because Star Wars kicked off some stuff. And what it kicked off predominantly wasn't good. And this was kind of bucked the trend a little bit, although it has some criticisms for
Yeah.
stealing some stuff and all
I
that sort of
mean,
jazz. But
really, Dragon Slayer, so a little bit of background on the production. So, because obviously the person who picks the film is like tasked with the job of like researching it or whatever. So, So I do know a bit about the making of Dragonslayer, and I can provide some much needed context for us to actually sort of get us through. So, Star Wars comes along in 1977, and of course, all studios want to replicate that success. Disney has a few different bites at this. Okay, they tried to get a bit of Star Wars money with Tron. They tried with a film called The Black Hole. And then even though Dragon Slayer isn't a science fiction or space movie, it's still trying to capture that same spirit of adventure that Star Wars was doing, and they were using the same visual effects studios that Star Wars was using, and there's a lot of crossover on those production teams, and so Dragon Slayer was clearly basically their attempt at doing Star Wars but as fantasy this time, and you can kind of see that in the DNA of the film, and that sounds like a criticism, but it's sort of not, because when I first watched this, which was a few years ago now, I actually liked it less than I like it now. I've probably seen the film 3 times now over a period of a few years, most recent being the rewatch I just did for this podcast. And each time I watch it, I like it more and more. The first time I thought, oh, look, this is hugely derivative of Star Wars and, Joseph Campbell's Monomyth and the hero's journey, and we've seen all of this stuff before. And then I kind of paid a bit more attention the next time, and I thought, look, they've remixed some stuff here, which is quite interesting, in the way that they've done it. And then, more recently, I'm like, there's a lot of darkness here as well, which was a little bit edgy and bold for the time. And look, that's probably a key reason why it didn't actually do very well at the cinema, because this film was really, Disney was known for obviously children's fare, and this film is definitely trying to hit more the teenage, young adult demographic, at the time. So, but being a Disney property, audiences didn't really know what to do with it, and the film didn't really know how to market itself
It had
either.
some really dark choices in this movie.
Absolutely. So,
Like for them trying to hit that audience, there's some weird missteps, really.
yeah, I don't. I mean, I think the audience was probably on board, like in that sort of late teens to young adult kind of audience. But I don't think the movie was marketed at that audience. I think it was marketed at kids, and then that sort of was yeah, like a bit whoa. So
The old Gremlins dilemma.
yeah, so I think that we sort of got in trouble there, and I should mention Paramount as well. This was back when studios teamed up. You know that
Wait,
that
Sony and Disney team up all the time on
so
Spooder, man.
yeah, because they have no choice. So, like, if either of those studios had any choice in the matter, I am positive that would not be taking place. But yeah, look, this is a co-production between Paramount and Disney, which were a lot more common back in the good old days.
Was that mainly because like Disney's specialties and Paramount specialties were a bit different, and so they co-combined to make a movie like that fit?
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot more common in general for studios to actually sort of team up and co-finance things, particularly things that they thought were a little bit of a risk, a little bit, perhaps left of center, and maybe they're hoping for a hit, but they wanted to hedge the bets a little bit. So it also sometimes depended on rights, and who owned what. But look, Dragon Slayer comes along. It does not do well, but it does. It's the little engine that could. It develops that good old cult following.
Well, VHS.
And and look, it's got a real legion of fans now. So and I think the still that I've picked for our little you know our little icon here sort of tells it all. Like, that's really what this movie is. It's a dude with a shield and a spear fighting a dragon over lava, and there's a girl who's tied up ready to be sacrificed to the dragon. So it's like it's really in firmly in that sort of I don't want to say sword and sorcery because that's got so many negative connotations, but it's very firmly in that sort of classic fantasy vein,
Well, I mean, you mentioned it earlier. It's a hero's journey to a T,
Mm,
right? Like, so for anyone who doesn't know what the hero's journey is, it's a classic storytelling device, really, of the things a protagonist goes through to complete their journey. Quite often seen in fantasy films. Never-ending Story and Star Wars are classic examples of a hero's journey. They usually involve a young protagonist who's called to action. They have an old mentor. They have certain challenges they face, all that sort of stuff, right? So this is very much retelling of a hero's journey, and I think any good retelling of a hero's journey or use of a hero's journey is interesting because the format is tried and true. Like it's easy to connect with the protagonist and things like that. It's only kind of in modern day storytelling and modern cinema where we're finally getting more movies and stories outside of that kind of genre that are just as interesting because we're evolving and diversifying and things like that. But like, so this movie, as I said, it took me a while to get into its rhythm. And it's just the rhythm of my brain used to watching modern films, catching up with the pace of a 1981 film, a fantasy film. And it is a bit slow. It lingers on a few things in the modern cinema that it wouldn't linger on, certain characters, certain moments. And you're just like, and then your brain just has to kind of catch up. Like the temptation for me to look at a phone in the first 20 minutes of this film was high
Yeah.
until I locked in on it. And I did lock in on it. And, so our hero from the hero's journey, what was his name? Sorry. All their names in this,
Galen. His name's Galen.
they go in one, out, year, and the other.
Yeah.
Like the country that this is set in is very much like the wizard's name, and I keep getting confused.
Yeah,
Uh,
and the girl's name's Valerian,
but
it's
it's not
all
Valer. Yeah.
yeah.
Or is she a girl?
Yeah.
Um, so the main character in this is played by Peter McNichol, who some might know as the secondary bad guy from Ghostbusters 2. He's in a whole bunch of stuff. This was his first piece of acting.
Yeah, so I believe he'd done, I could be wrong. I believe he'd done theater
Yeah,
before this, but this is his sort
his
of
his
entry
like
into
first
cinema.
credit. Like
Yeah. So it's like, and it's funny, like, he actually has been fairly negative about this film, in years past, which fair enough, whatever. It's one of his first acting roles. It wasn't a huge box office success. Um, and not to speak ill of an actor, like particularly a young actor, but I think that you know the performance there is a little bit inconsistent. As we sort of go through this film, it sort of walks this very strange pendulum where we're a little bit we're cocky and overconfident, and then we're nervous and boyish, and it sort of swings back and forth. And actually, the characterization of Galen is probably one of the things that I like the least about the film.
he is the least interesting person in the movie.
Yeah, he's also sort of, he's a bit arrogant, and really, but that's not a huge issue for the movie because Galen is essentially a plot device. So
He's almost the MacGuffin.
yeah, he's
Like
he's really just there to keep that movie rolling along. But I think Valerian's a really interesting character, as is like probably like one of the most interesting things about this film is the princess character who Elsbeth, I believe her name is. So,
Elsbeth is the name.
yeah, and now she's just a fascinating character, and I really would have loved to see more with her and her father, the king, because those two are just fascinating to me as like character studies.
Well, what would normally be the traditional kind of like Princess Leia sidekick character actually wasn't and had some depth and growth
But
to her
also
character.
very little screen time to go along with
Yeah,
that. So
so what she went through, and like spoilers, like everyone who's sacrificed to this dragon dies.
yeah.
like nobody gets rescued in this movie.
No, and I think that's what's really unusual about it. I mean, the moment that Ben and I are talking about is about three-quarters of the way through the film, and basically, hopefully you've seen it if you're watching this, because you tuned in last time and watched along with us. But like so Princess Elsbeth basically rigs the lottery so that she will definitely be sacrificed to the dragon, and
Well, she
then
finds out she's never been in the lottery.
that's right, and then so it's this act of heroism where she sort of takes the bullet, but then she takes the bullet Like she's
Yeah,
allowed to just take the bullet. And like, it's incredibly heroic and sacrificial and all those things, but usually, hero characters in films are bailed out of actually having to do the sacrifice.
especially that era of film.
Yeah, that's
Like that
right.
era of film, the heroes are rewarded with a certain amount of plot armor that provides them their heroic redemption or their moment. But her moment of heroism was the sacrifice, being
Yeah.
put into the lottery.
And then it's like
And
literally like she even like, antes up and walks into the cave with the torch and you're like, wow, what's gonna happen in the cave? And the next thing it's like there's like a dragon baby gnawing on the bone of her leg and I'm like, that like,
it bites off her foot,
yeah. I'm just like
and it doesn't hide it.
so
It
yeah.
bites off her
It's
foot.
just like full on. So, and it's not to say that like, I don't like gore or anything like that, but just as a character moment, it's sad, it's poignant, it's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they did that. Like there's so much there. And then also I think the king is a super interesting character. I love the ending of the film where he just walks up and like points his sword at the dragon and they're like, "Hail, Dragonslayer!" And I'm like, "Yeah." So,
Like we'll probably get to it, but the end message of this film, I think there are like three attempts at it, and they're all different. Is a bit weird, and I
yeah,
didn't 100% see it coming because it kind of like it's like someone wanted to say something, but they only really nudged it in right at the end of that movie. So I mean, just to get out of the way, there is a really strange subplot with a local religious community or church, right?
yeah. So where,
And like they're kind of brought in, and they're brought in to do the classic foible of, oh, it's not real. It's just the devil, and if we pray, it'll go away, and then that guy gets eaten, and you kind of think that's the end of it. You're like, oh, they learned their mistake. It's a bit of a weird way to do that plot point, but they learned their mistake. But then at the end of the movie, it recircles. Another character is now in charge of the church, and they say God did it all, and you're like, why is this in the movie?
yeah, it's a very strange sort of pseudo political message that
Yeah.
just sort of like heads into the film. And
I
and look,
actually think it cheapens the king's moment.
yeah, well, it's. I mean, the King's the like that's obviously also sort of I think
Yeah.
it's quite funny, like
Oh yeah.
and obviously it's sort of supposed to be, but it's and that's an interesting choice too. Again, a choice that really doesn't have anything to do with the film. It's just
It's a
almost
statement.
it's almost like a cheap statement, really, But
Well, I mean, if you looked at current politicians, I mean, politicians have always been the same. It's very like, oh, I'm coming in to claim I did this thing because that's what we do.
yeah, it's just sort of strange when, as you sort of say, the rest of the movie's not really about that, like the
And then the final message, Tim, is that the magic is inside of him
yeah.
all along.
Yeah, and yeah, we're all magic, Ben. So there's magic inside of all of us. Um,
So I really dug the end of this film, and I didn't realize why until I did a little reading, and I realized it's really kind of just a different spin on the Sorcerer's Apprentice ending.
yeah,
So right at the start of this film, the big sorcerer that everyone's coming to get to kill the dragon, well, he's a necromancer, really. Um,
yeah. It's sort of like at
they
two
don't want to say
points they
necromancer.
don't. They do say it at like 2 points
Yeah.
in the film, but they're really not wanting to say that.
So like they're like, well, are you really powerful? He's like, yeah, stab me, and they stab him, and he dies.
Yeah,
And you're like, huh, that's a weird way to initiate the call to action for this young man. And then at the end of the movie, his manservant, who really cruelly gets murdered, had been carrying his ashes. Was it? Was
yeah,
it his ashes?
yeah. So
Along.
So Hodge is carrying the ashes, and in the woods when Hodge dies, he gives the ashes to Galen, who then has to scatter them over the lake of fire, which is
Gives us our Gandalf the White moment.
exactly. So, but like it's interesting. You said something before, which was that it reminds you of the Sorcerer's Apprentice. There were two inspirations for this film, and one of them was the
Yeah.
Sorcerer's Apprentice sequence in Fantasia. The second one is the more obvious one, which is the George and the Dragon story.
Yes.
So that's and obviously that George and the Dragon story, has been going for
Hundreds and
eons.
hundreds.
So everyone's pretty up on what that is. So, but like I think both of those are pretty cool inspirations, really. And it also kind of explains why Disney is making this film because they own the rights to the Soldier's Apprentice
Yeah.
sequence.
I have a question, and I might have missed it in the film. Why doesn't the king want the dragon dead?
So the king does want the dragon dead. He just doesn't believe Galen can do it. So the king's solution was the lottery, and the lottery
Hmm.
is totally a solution that the king is happy to go with because it doesn't cost him anything. Whereas as soon as sort of Galen's like, no, let's poke it. Let's the king's like, why you got to do that? All we got to do is wait the dragon out. It's old. It's gonna die. And all we have to do is sacrifice one person every year. It's fine. Like, you know what I mean? So that's sort of like the king's philosophy, which is
So it's just him being like don't rock the boat. Like,
exactly, he's just being shrewd,
but why
really.
why kill the manservant in the forest?
Well, but that wasn't the king. That was the Tyrion
So
character.
his motivations are separate. Like he's like protecting the kingdom from the darkness or whatever.
Yeah, Tyrion's basically like your catch-all, just not a cool
Jerk.
guy,
Yeah.
like so
Okay.
he's kind of doing the king's bidding, but then he like goes rogue on his own and like does his own thing. But like so look, we got you mentioned the religious subplot before, which leads us to what is it's not a cameo because
It's
you
it's
can't
not. He's a named character.
well, but also like you can't cameo. It's not a cameo if it happens before you're known. Do you know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
really
yeah.
more like a bit part for.
A reverse cameo.
It's a reverse cameo for the one, the only Emperor Palpatine. From
Ian McDiarmid.
that's right. So this is a pre Return of the Jedi role for the Star Wars Emperor.
And he delightfully chews the scenery.
Yeah, he does, and he's only
Uh,
got like a scene and a half or something.
yeah, nails it.
Yeah, it's just you can like just see like at that point they're like, we need a good British day player to just
Yeah.
come in and just smash it. Someone with theatre training. Like this guy.
Well, I mean that a lot of fantasy films of this era, there's a lot of theater and Broadway people in them. Because I think a lot of these films were seen as obviously below Hollywood actors
Mhm.
and things like that. So I mean, you look at the cast of this, and a lot of these people are theater actors or Broadway actors. So yeah, having someone here like him, who everyone probably knew on that set, it's like, oh, we'll just get Ian in to do this part.
Yeah,
That'd be awesome, and he killed it. Like,
yeah. Not the dragon though. That would have been more helpful.
no,
But
and so one of the few facts I know about this movie is the dragon was 25% of the movie's budget.
yeah, which like I think the dragon looks great. Like
It does.
really, I mean, it's a 1981 dragon, and I think really until you hit Dragonheart in '96, we probably didn't have a better dragon on screen.
Oh, not at all. I remember looking at like they very much jaws the dragon for most of the movie.
Yeah.
Like you see like a tail or a claw, or you don't even see it at all. You just hear it roar, and I really enjoyed that. And when the dragon finally came out, I'm like, oh, it's a cool dragon. And I was looking at it, and I'm like, something's really bugging me about this dragon. It's a good-looking dragon, like it's awesome for that. But what's really bugging me? Do you know what was bugging me about this dragon? And it's the
No.
most niche thing ever. It didn't blink.
Ah.
See, in a modern movie, that thing would blink. They would do all that, and you don't even notice it's blinking, but it does blink. This one doesn't blink. I really also liked the design of the baby dragons.
Yeah. They were kind of
Um,
disturbing. They weren't like cute.
yeah.
Like it was like, that's
Well, I
a
mean, the dragon itself very much was disturbing. Like,
yeah. And I mean, look, people talk about Vermithrax pejorative as like
best dragon name of all time.
it's a fantastic dragon name, like and but see, and the thing is, like with Dragonslayer, even before I'd seen it the first time, I knew Vermithrax. Like, Vermithrax pejorative is like a famous film dragon. Like, people often refer to it, it's used as reference. It's like, for many years, people were saying this is the greatest cinematic dragon of all time. Like, and I think there's a lot of merit to that. I think it's a great looking dragon. And it's also like, when you say they jaws it, which they absolutely do, but when you actually see the final, model puppet, the full scale one that they built, it looks good. Like,
Yeah,
it's
the Jawsing, unlike Jaws, was a deliberate choice. Like Jaws was a necessity that turned out
yes.
to be awesome, but it was a deliberate choice because the dragon did look cool, and it performed awesome. And like when it breathed fire, it looked scary. Like it looked like it was about to wipe out whatever it was going to blow fire at. Like,
Yeah, it's a very cool dragon, and I think they used it really well. Like the flight stuff at the end looks pretty darn good. Like, and it was like, cutting edge visual effects at the time, but like way before computers. So it was or rather there was some computerization, but on a robotics level rather than a
yeah, it wasn't a digital effects.
no,
Yeah,
that's
like
right. Yeah, it wasn't CGI. It was this stop motion hybrid technology called Go Motion, pioneered by Phil Tippett on Empire Strikes Back, which he'd just come off of. So there's sort of a lot of shared DNA between that and Star Wars. But look, Ben,
so.
we've talked
I
Dragon Slayer.
I just want to quickly say I've been picking things from films that I think make good movies and should be in every movie. And I've got something from this movie.
Hit me.
Do you know what? Okay, it has to do with the combat in this film. All swords should spark when they hit other swords. And not just spark, but like flash.
Yeah,
Like yeah, I loved that. And I loved the animation of him hitting the dragon with the spear, like the magic spear,
yeah.
and stuff like that. Like it was like something so like wrong. It shouldn't be in the movie, right? But it's so 80s
It's
that
also
it
like
made me so happy.
that whole like let's forge a spear that's imbued with magic and is like hotter than anything and is gonna like that's just baller. It's just awesome. Like
And I want to point out too, like this movie did something I love with fantasy magic, and it's what Lord of the Rings does. The magic itself, until the end, is not super flashy.
mm,
It serves a practical purpose. Like it's not like a fireball or a thing like that. It's like, oh, I can heat the metal and make it easier for you to work, which will imbue it with extra properties and things like that. I really dug that, and obviously at the end, the head wizard's like the necromancer's just throwing lightning bolts. But again, he doesn't just throw lightning bolts. He spent time. He summoned all the clouds around him, and he called the lightning bolts down. It was like a practical version of magic in a strange way. Like they didn't just pull it out of thin air.
yeah,
Does that
it
make
was
sense?
yeah, I get it. Like, and I think yeah, I think there's a lot of good craft to this movie, just all round. So if you haven't seen it, see it, unless you
Definitely see
don't
it.
want to, in which case you shouldn't. You shouldn't do
Look,
things you don't want to do.
I actually think people younger than us may struggle to watch it, and it's just from the fast movie brain that we now have. But if you can get past that, it's an enjoyable film. It's a film that shares and puts its DNA forward into the future that you'll notice from other films and borrows from other films, and I think it's definitely worth a watch. Like I watched it twice, so
Well, there you go. Well, look, I hope you enjoyed Dragon Slayer, Ben. But I
I
would
did.
like to receive my next assignment. What are we doing next week?
I literally have two movies up in front of me, and I can't choose.
Okay,
So
right hand,
what I'm
left
gonna
hand.
do, what I'm gonna do is simple. I would like you to choose number one or number two.
Okay,
Go ahead.
two.
We are watching The Sandlot.
Ah, The
I
Sandlot.
know you've definitely seen this movie.
Yeah.
It is one of my kind of childhood happy places.
Okay.
That it's one of those movies that I had on VHS that I played non-stop on weekends and stuff for a little while. It's definitely a movie I've watched as an adult and enjoyed again, and for different reasons, because I think it's a layered movie. Um, Do you want to know what the other movie could have been, or do you want to hold on to it?
Well, will we watch it at some point?
Oh, most definitely. Either
Oh, well
you will
then
pick it or I will pick it.
hold off.
Okay. Yeah, so next week's movie will be The Sandlot, and I hope you guys enjoy it because I think I'm going to.
Love it. Bye.
Thank you.